Testing. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So I have to use the mic because they're recording it. So apologize in advance because I'm like a loud talker. So if I yell, you just like raise your hand and be like, that's too loud, okay? So welcome everybody. My name is Emily Rasowsky and I'm the founder of All Women in Tech, which is the company that started the Women in Tech campaign. So I'm really excited to talk with you guys about hacking the definition of women in technology. I think it'll hopefully be a lively conversation. But before we get there, I know we're running a little bit behind, but it's been the morning, right? Saturday morning. So if we could all maybe stretch for a second. Let's stand up. Let's all stand up. I know everyone hates when presenters do this. I know. We're gonna reach your arms up to the sky. Just take a nice stretch, yes. All right, now turn around in a circle. Turn around. Aware of your spacing. Okay, come face center. Now find someone who's next to you, stick your right hand out or left hand out, whatever. And introduce yourself. Okay? Yes? All right, yeah, okay, I know. That was incredibly cheesy. Incredibly cheesy, I know. But so one of the things that you'll hopefully hear me talk about, if I've done my job correctly, you guys can have a seat, sorry, is this idea of community. So when you think about women in tech and the definition, there's a lot of things that we'll be talking about today that hopefully will stir up some conversation or perhaps questions, and it's always good to know some of your neighbors. So just bear with me there. So before we get into some of the details around women in tech and kind of who we are and what we do, I want to start with a story. I want to start with our story, the Women in Tech campaign. Why do we exist, and what was the impetus behind this creation? So it all started about a year ago. The women in the company that I work for were featured in an article called The New Face of Technology. So it was a bunch of women from all backgrounds in technology who were kind of having their imprint on tech. And so as one does when they're featured in an article, you kind of get excited, right? You look forward to posting it, you're sharing it out on your social media feeds. And something happened that I don't think any of us were really ready for or anticipated. You know, you always expect maybe there's going to be a few naysayers or negative commentary. But when we posted this article, we got a tremendous amount of negative feedback. We were told that the women who were at this company were not representative of the women in tech space or just the technology industry in general. We were told that just the fact of having this article published, we were hurting the cause of women in tech. And this is the one that really kind of irked me the most, is that you're not really in technology. But why? Why? Let me tell you a little about the women who I work with. So every single one of them that was featured in this post loves technology. They wouldn't do it if they didn't love it. They devote their jobs to this. They understand how to leverage technology. They do it every single day. It was a digital agency that the women were working for, so they were from all different backgrounds. They have a diverse background, diverse experiences. We had people who were in the HR department, marketing, operations, sales, project management, design, and they all had a baseline understanding of engineering. Maybe it was in their free time, they're coding and hacking, going to hackathons, coding full websites, the whole gamut. Or maybe it was they've taken a few classes, understand some basic line of code, but they have a basic understanding of engineering. But there's one thing that our group of women did not have, and it was a female engineer. And so this kind of raised a question within our organization. What is a woman in tech? What does this definition actually mean? Is it that you have to have a certain set of skills, which, like I said with this final point, a lot of us actually did have, even though it wasn't necessarily part of our job title? Or is it that you have to have a set of understanding of technology and what we do and why it matters? And so I would argue, and I guess my conclusion, was that it's this larger definition, that actually women in tech, well, tremendously important that we have these hard skills. It's also tremendously important that we recognize and acknowledge some of the softer skills or some of the larger experiences that people have that make up this community. So we decided to do something about it, which is why we started the Women in Tech campaign. So what is the Women in Tech campaign? The Women in Tech campaign is an initiative to expand the definition of women in technology to be more inclusive of all backgrounds and all experiences. Why? Because we believe that if we empower more women to be involved in the technology space, no matter what their background, no matter what their experience, we can actually help solve the problems that we're seeing in our world around women in technology, some of those disastrous numbers that I'm sure a lot of the folks in this room are actually quite familiar with. So when we begin to share the stories of women who are in various backgrounds of technology, using tech as a tool to improve their lives and their communities, we can actually make a difference. So that's what we've done. We've decided to collect stories of women from all across the world. with 3 core pillars. We believe that if we can elevate people, so sharing people, we're sharing the stories of people. We have a site that I'll talk about in just a second, where we feature women from all across the world who have these diverse backgrounds. We believe that we also need to build community. So actually not just elevating women and the great things that they're doing, but actually connecting them so that change can happen. And that we feel that if we do both of these things very successfully, that we can actually catalyze action and catalyze change in our world. And so when we started this campaign, it was really modest. We were kind of just looking in our Rolodexes, or I guess iPhones now, or our address books, and just reaching out to people and women who we thought inspired us, who were in the technology industry. It started out as about 10 or 12 stories and a few Twitter posts. I mean, really, super basic. And we found that there was a tremendous amount of interest. People ended up reaching out to us, kind of at a crazy rapid pace. And so what started out as what was planned to be just a 1-month campaign, a 1-month initiative, has turned into a larger conversation that features over 80 women from 8 different countries with a variety of different job titles, and counting. We're still collecting these stories. We're still sharing these stories. We've reached over 10 million people with the conversations that we've been able to start. I'll talk a little bit more about that and some of the work that we've actually done there. And we've been able to collect women, quality stories from all different backgrounds. And this is, I think, the piece that I'm most proud of. This is a selection of the organizations and companies that the women in our organization represent, or the women who are featured represent. We have women from all different age ranges, people who are just starting their career and just kind of figuring out, okay, what is this technology stuff about and how can I really use it? To women who are in the C-suite or executive level positions at some of these top companies. We have women who not only identify in, women minority, but also are a secondary minority. 25% of the women who are featured on our site identify with either some sort of additional secondary minority, such as sexual orientation, race, or ethnicity. So something that we're pretty excited about, pretty proud of. But there's something here that I think is missing. And it's something that a lot of women who are doing this work aren't necessarily talking about. So despite all these numbers, despite all these metrics, despite all these really cool profiles, there's something that's happening here that was really surprising to me when I started this work. So there's one question that most of the women, not all, but most of the women who are featured have asked me at one point or another. Does anyone have an idea, just an idea, a guess of what that question is? Shout it out, raise your hands, if you know, if you think. Bueller? No? Okay. So the question is, are you sure that I'm a woman in technology? Are you sure that I'm a woman in tech? Me? Really? Because I think there's other women out there that are doing just way more than I have done. They've got more qualifications. They've got more experience. Are you sure I'm a woman in tech? And so it raises this question. What is the definition of women in technology? How do we actually define it? Go back to that earlier slide. How do you define women in tech? And so I started to do a little bit of research. By the way, it was really, really challenging for me to try to find any sort of face figure that looked like a female, so I landed on this. Just a note I'm putting in there. So we started to do some research. We started to ask ourselves, okay, why is it that it's so hard to actually get folks to claim, yes, I'm a woman in tech, to stand up and raise their hand? Because what's happening behind the scenes among all of those 80 women, 80 plus women who are featured, for every one person who's gone through the process of being featured, there's probably about 5 who've dropped off along the way. Crazy, right? And I get it, we're busy, we've got things going on, but if you were really interested in this process, you'd think that number would probably be a little bit higher. At least I would hope. And so I have to ask myself why. Why? I think it's because, this is just a hypothesis, I think it's because it's a little bit scary to take on that definition. Women in tech. Well, it's kind of undefined. There's a lot of problems associated with it. If you Google women in technology, which I'm assuming some of you guys in this room probably have, or else maybe you wouldn't be in this room, you've seen some of the negative things that are associated with being a woman in tech, right? So it's a little uncomfortable. So I thought to myself, okay, what can I do? What can this organization do to really begin to combat that, to really begin to make this more accessible to people? Now, I can't necessarily go around and kind of work through everybody's areas of not sureness or whatever, let's just call it insecurity, because I'm not really sure how else to describe it. I would probably have to go into a different vertical or different profession. But what I can probably do is I can probably begin to put some confines, put some parameters around what it means to be a woman in tech, so that people actually feel that they can take that with pride and wear that as a badge. Like, I'm a woman in tech, and it means something really awesome. And I think, and the purpose of this talk is to talk through some of the ways that I think not only the Women in Tech campaign can do this, but how every single person in this room, no matter your age, no matter your gender, no matter your background, can actually begin to help this problem as well. So there's 3 core things I'm going to talk about today. 3 core ways that I think we can begin to change this definition or hack this definition to be something really awesome. 1, I think we need to promote the positive. So as I mentioned, if you Google women in technology stats. I mean, if you haven't done it, go home, do it. You know, have a glass of wine or something next to you because you're probably going to need it. It's terrible. If you look at what people are saying about women in technology, you find statistics like this. Now, I'm the first one to say that the decline of women who are in mathematical and more hard technical skills is a terrible problem, and it's not one that I'm dismissing at all. And just to reinforce that, the majority of women on our site are also just hardcore coders and engineers. Like, I get this. I'm not speaking, from a place of ignorance, right? We're seeing these statistics. They're terrible, and we need to do something about them. But this is a pretty bad thing to find when you're trying to say, okay, am I a woman in tech? Oh, well, I guess there really aren't that many women in tech, and this isn't really a desirable field because people aren't getting hired and, all these things. But this isn't the complete story. Because if you dig deeper into the research, which I have, and I'm not proud to say I've done probably my fair share of women in tech research, more than I'm proud to admit, is that that's not the full story. There are women in technology who are leveraging tech in a way that their male counterparts, aren't necessarily doing. 17% of women are more apt, in Western countries, are using the internet more than their male counterparts. Women are a part of 85% of all technology purchasing decisions in the household. Women are using technology more than men in most cases. They're more likely to be early adopters of technology. So there are women in tech. There are women out there who are doing this who aren't necessarily standing up, raising their hand and say, I'm a woman in tech, feature me. Right? So we have to start talking about these positive stories, the positive instances of what's happening in our world. One story that I want to share, which I think illustrates this point better than any that I probably could come up with myself. So when we first started this campaign, there was a woman who was based in Nigeria. This was around the time of the Ebola crisis when she reached out to us. And she said, I'm not really sure, again, this question, if I'm a woman in tech. I helped the Red Cross create the SMS text messaging system to spread healthcare information amongst my community in Nigeria. But I'm not a coder. I don't have a background in technology. This is just something that I'm really interested in, and I was a health worker, and I just really wanted to be a part of it, and I just said, hey, text messaging can work. And she asked me, are you sure I'm in tech? Right? I'm like, well, yeah, of course you are. You, freaking solved the Ebola crisis. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but, you helped support this. So how do we define this? Does she love technology? Yeah, you bet she does. Does she understand how to leverage technology to improve her life and her community? Yes. Does she understand, does she have a diverse background? Yes, she comes from all different backgrounds and experiences. And most importantly, does she determine herself a woman in technology? Well, we're helping try to change that. The next thing we can do is begin to reconstruct our constructs. So everybody, no matter who you are and where you're from, probably has some sort of ism in their life. We all know these isms. We're familiar with them: sexism, racism, ageism, all these things, right? You've heard these in your life. And one little fact about me, I love musicals. Anyone seen Avenue Q? Yes. Okay. So there's a song in Avenue Q that I think really demonstrates this point. And I'll preface this by saying that I'm not calling you guys racist, but the song that says, we're all a little bit racist sometimes. So this song is all about how in our lives we have these moments or we have these experiences where we basically have these constructs of how we understand other people. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. It's just the thing that exists. And if we can begin to understand where our isms lie, where our constructs are, we can actually begin to raise some awareness, to begin to shift our behavior to support some of those, or to, combat some of those biases. So how do we begin to restructure that construct? Because it's actually something that's making a tremendous impact in the technology space. If you look at some of the things that are happening in technology right now, 41% of women are getting science and engineering degrees, but they barely fill over a quarter of tech jobs. And in good instances, 30%. Research shows time and time again, I hope none of these things are surprises to you, because I'm sure if you're in this space, you've probably heard something like this in the past, that even if women have the same set of backgrounds, they're less likely to get the same exact position than a man is. So we have these biases. They exist. And just to kind of bring the point home, one of the things that we do at the Women in Tech campaign is we organize these events called #TechIsMore conversations. They're digital, they're 100% online, and they basically start the conversation around how gender and technology are really intersecting. And so we had an event last month where I asked a bunch of women to be a part of this digital panel and answer a few questions. one of the questions that we asked, which I thought was really fascinating, was what is the biggest misconception about women in technology? Just to really demonstrate what we're seeing on the ground, personal experiences, personal accounts. Number one thing that we heard time and time again from folks who were on the panel and people just participating online was that it's not a pipeline problem. That if you want to hire women and minorities, hire women and minorities. When people are hired, there's assumptions that they're not qualified or filling a quota. These are things that we're trying to work against every single day, right? So this is out there. These are things that we can begin to question ourselves and just ask, where do I have these constructs and how can I begin to work through them? And the third thing is to embrace the future. So the future is changing, right? Technology has changed our world in a way that is just unprecedented. We've been able to do things that we just didn't think were possible 10, 15, even 20 years ago, right? So we have to actually embrace that change. I liken this to the instance of fire. So nothing has changed our world in a more rapid or, quick way than the introduction of fire. We're able to do things longer, quicker. We're able to connect with people in ways that were just kind of unprecedented before. So how do we actually begin to leverage this change, leverage the energy to begin to catalyze action? And I think it's easy to come in and say, oh, we all got to hire a ton of women in diversity, whatever. But I think what actually is going to make the change is something that happens at a very micro level, that happens at a very individual level. When we begin to, in our own lives, focus on the positive, focus on those positive stories, those positive accounts of women who are changing technology. When we begin to understand our biases, when we begin to understand these constructs that we have in our lives, we can begin to work around them. But that's a personal thing. It's not necessarily a company-wide initiative. And when we begin to understand that unless we do this, unless we begin to encourage more women in technology, we're going to be behind in a lot of ways, then it's not ever going to change. So it happens at a very individual level. And so I want to kind of top off with just a few things that I think we're trying to do to actually make some of this change a reality. So the first thing is that we have our site. So what is the point of this site? It's to elevate people. We feature women, their background, their story. We share how they got into technology, which I think is really fascinating. If you read some of these stories, you'll find that women oftentimes are doing something kind of like this, where they're maybe starting here and then going here and then going there and finding that technology just very nicely intersects with what they're trying to do. We also share different pieces of information, pieces of advice to try and encourage young women and girls to get involved. You can always reach out. Building community, that's a key piece, at least for me, is that if there's anyone at all or any conversation that you want to have or any conversation that you want to start, reach out. It happens at an individual level, but it makes a big change. All those 80 women, all it started out with is one single contact. And the third thing is to start a conversation. So one of the things that we're doing is really trying to build these conversations in a larger way, in a way that's accessible for everyone. So all of our conversations are around the hashtag #TechIsMore, and they're 100% digital events, like I mentioned. They happen all across social media at the same time, simultaneously. So Facebook, Twitter, and Periscope all happen at once, and we talk about issues and topics that are relevant to our organization, or to basically just the women in tech space. And so join a conversation, whether it's our conversation or your own, within your organization, within your company, within your team. Just start talking. Because if we don't start talking, if we don't start making these micro changes, we're never actually going to combat this larger problem. And so I'll leave you with one last piece of advice. I would say that instead of thinking about, God, all of this work we have to do to try to get women in tech, I would ask yourself, what can I do today? What can I do tomorrow? What can I do next week that's going to further or encourage more women, more diversity in your office, in your team, within your family, however you want to interpret that, but on a very personal level, because it's a one-on-one connection that actually leads to bigger change. So, get going. Okay. So, does anyone have any questions? Yeah. You mean as far as like the kind of older technologies, or? Right. Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating question. And when you talk with a lot of young girls or just young people in general, you're exactly hitting on it. They're kind of like, yeah, well, duh, I know how to like build a website. Doesn't everybody know how to build like a website? It just becomes part of the vernacular. It just becomes part of the culture. And I think what we're seeing kind of in, a couple years removed from maybe just being, that younger subset, is that unless we do something now, we're actually not going to see the results later. So I actually think that, in 5-10 years, hopefully this conversation will change and the conversation, the presentation that I have will be totally different, right? I really hope that, because I think that there's more opportunity in some of those basic things that we think, okay, basic programming skills, basic, understanding of language, basic understanding of technology will just be commonplace. And so I don't necessarily think that that's not deterring, or that's deterring women to be involved. I think it's a larger issue. I think it's how we talk about it in general. One thing that's really fascinating to me is that when you look and you Google women in tech, so I always go back to, okay, you're Googling women in tech and you're just seeing what's out there because it's a huge part of the conversation. Oftentimes you see a lot of the same women or the same types of women. A lot of the times they have a specific title, a lot of the times they have a specific degree. And so it kind of makes this construct of what is a woman in technology without ever really defining it. And so what we're trying to do is actually begin to combat that, because if more women, more young people, just in general, realize that it's not just about a specific degree or specific skill set, but really just this understanding and this love of technology to leverage it in a way that's actually going to make impact in real people's lives and their communities, then we can begin to have a larger group of women who are interested and excited, not because, I really love coding, but, because I really love health, because I really want to make a difference in, the Ebola crisis in Nigeria. So I think it's just about telling those stories in a way that's not, so focused on a specific set of skills. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. So 2 things that I want to address. So one, the first one's quick. What are we doing that is empowering kind of younger girls, younger women to be involved in technology? So I have to say, when I started this organization, that was, I think, the first thing that most people asked me. So what are you going to do to mentor young girls? And I think that is so important and so critical, but we have to start with the women who are in tech first. That's my perspective. So if we're saying, we need to mentor young women, but we ourselves aren't actually sure of what it means to be in technology, then I think it's like step 2. I guess the way I say it, it's like stage 2. Like stage 1, let's start with what we got. Let's start with our community. Let's start empowering the women that we have who are really just, kicking butt and taking names. I mean, really, we got to elevate these folks. Because I'll tell you, what I've found in doing this is that there are people kind of in the woodwork who aren't raising their hand. They're not saying this is what I do. They're not saying I'm a woman in tech, but they are by those definitions, by those points, right? And you first got to get them to understand, yes, you are in this space. Like having you in this space and having you kind of stand up and say you are is going to actually, tangentially really affect the larger conversation. And then let's talk about partnering on doing some mentorship initiatives. The other piece is that my philosophy is always, if there are people who are doing something that's just so much better than I could probably do myself, I want to partner with them. So we partner with organizations if there is an interest. So if someone comes to me and they're in the tech space and they're like, I really want you to help connect me with an organization that is mentoring young girls. We've got women who are in our repertoire, who are in the conversation, who that's all they do. That is their sole focus. That's their sole goal. And so let's connect you with them, because I don't want to necessarily try and do something if they're already doing it better. Does that make sense? Cool. Mm-hmm. I love it. Yeah. They do take out the, that is correct. They do take out, in most cases. Although that, yeah. Partnership. Yes, partnership. That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's a fantastic point. So, just to kind of recap, she was talking about how there are some of these things in our culture that really impact how women see themselves and if they actually feel like that, yes, tech is the job that I want to go into. Paraphrasing, but generally, yeah. So, one of the things that I think is really fascinating about that is, it's very true. And it's kind of that second point, right? So, we have these constructs in our heads, how we understand the world, what we've been told, what we're seeing on TV and commercial, online, whatever. We have these constructs that we develop that tell us what we should and shouldn't do. And so I think it's easy to say everybody everywhere just needs to change how they look at women and just change the way that they're approaching women. That'd be easy, right, just to say that. But the change that actually happens on a really micro level. It happens at an individual level. And so it's not necessarily, tomorrow we have to change absolutely everything about women in our tech sector. But actually what this is pointing to is a larger issue that we have in our culture, in cultures across the world, right? There's this disparity between women and men. And what I think is happening is that technology is actually just reflective of what's happening in our culture. That just because we're in this really cool, innovative tech hub, right, doesn't mean that we are not necessarily open to the same things that are happening across the board. Just my thought. Okay, your hand was up first, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly right. And I think it's part of, that larger conversation because you're right. It's not necessarily, let's get more women to have software degrees, right? It's, okay, let's actually just begin to change the conversation around what it means to have a software degree and how that can actually be beneficial to some of these other things that might play into these pre-existing social constructs. So, yeah, we're on the same page. Okay, so I have to kind of wrap it up, but I know your hand was up first, and then if you have other questions, you can chat with me. Well, thanks so much, guys. I know there are a couple extra hands, so if you have questions, come up here and we'll chat. Have a good rest of your afternoon.